You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
So part of this, I definitely want, talk about your story as much as you want to talk about it. And then about why you're doing what you're doing and how it, how large has this gotten?
So Cornbread Hustle started in
18.
No, I got sober in 2018.
That's what 2018
But
was.
that's when it felt like it all began, because I had no business starting this company without being sober.
But you did it sober, right?
Man. So I started the business in 2016. And looking back, I can admit that I didn't know this. I didn't have the self-awareness back then.
Yeah.
I was drawn to people who needed help because I needed help. And I wanted to pour into other people while unknowingly filling myself up with alcohol. So I was trying to fix other people instead of fixing myself. And so when I started the company, I was more of I guess you could say, a work hard, party hard girl. I thought to myself, I don't do meth anymore, because my story is I was addicted to meth in high school, and I ended up figuring a way to get off that drug. I did the whole just sweep everything under the rug and focus on achievement and success and seeking validation. So I replaced the addiction with alcohol, but because alcohol is legal and it seemed acceptable to society, I didn't really believe I had a problem. It took a long time for me to not only be convinced by others, but to convince myself that I had a problem. So when I started the company in 2016, I still successfully helped a lot of people. I did have a knack for entrepreneurship. I had a knack for business. I was very connected. I loved networking and mentorship. And I took all of those skills and taught them to people in prison. I started volunteering for the prison entrepreneurship program. And as people started getting out, they were like, okay, so what now? I'm ready to start my business. And I'm like, with $50 and a bus ticket? Let's reverse engineer your big picture goals, and let's start with entrepreneurship, and I will help you get your foot in the door somewhere where you can start learning more about the business you want to start and get paid for doing it, because your parole officer says you need to get a job. She's not going to be too lenient if you say I'm not getting a job because I'm trying to start a business. And so I started picking up the phone and cold calling businesses and teaching the guys, especially the guys who spent 20 plus years in prison, how to use Google. That was mind blowing for them. And one by one, I started placing people in jobs. And that's when I went to Google myself and I typed in how to start a staffing agency. And I, one by one, just went through the steps, and I figured it out very slowly, very painfully. I didn't understand how expensive workers' comp would be, or how expensive all the insurances I needed to carry were. And a lot of times I was chasing my own tail, but it would have been a lot easier if I was sober. I will tell you that.
I'm sure.
So I did eventually get sober. I had a DWI, and it just felt really wrong getting a DWI as the founder of a staffing agency for second chances. And that's when I had to take a hard look in the mirror. When I went through true recovery, because getting off meth, I didn't go through true recovery. I didn't have to suffer. I replaced that addiction with a new addiction, two new addictions, alcoholism and achievement. And so when I got my car repoed, had no money in the bank, was on probation, and literally having to walk the walk of the people I was serving, that's when I had to feel all those feelings and truly transform and truly get into recovery. And so 1 year comes around, being 1 year sober. It's COVID, and I freaked out. I was like, okay, I barely held on. I kept this company not profitable, but break even. I was doing side hustles. I was doing everything I could just to, and back then, I say back then like I'm so old, but it's nearly a decade ago. It wasn't easy to convince employers to give me money to hire people with criminal records. It's a lot easier today than it was back then. So COVID comes around and I'm seeing on the news that people are going to lose their jobs. We can't work. Everyone needs to stay at home. And I looked at the 5 or 6 people that worked for me and I was like, hey, you guys want to still work, right? And they're like, we have to. And I was like, so do I. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy hazmat suits and I'm changing our company website from Cornbread Hustle to CBH Disinfecting. And we're going to disinfect workplaces because I know that that's going to be a demand. And so we bought electrostatic spray guns and we bought hazmat suits and all the PPE before everyone else bought it all up. Definitely a God thing. I feel like God gave me that wisdom and guidance whenever I needed it. And we were disinfecting warehouses, and that was my first $100,000 month as an entrepreneur, which is a big thing for an entrepreneur that's been struggling to try to make money starting businesses for 10 years. And the craziest thing happened. And I usually cry when I talk about it because it's such a God thing. But I'm literally cleaning the toilets like a janitor in a hazmat suit. And one of the managers taps me on the shoulder and they're like, ma'am, how your employees are coming to work? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, where did you find these employees? Because all of our employees are sitting at home making unemployment because unemployment is paying more than what we can pay for these jobs right now. And I was like, prison, and just shrugged my shoulders. And that's when our company did our first $1 million that year, because all of these companies were like, well, we want some people coming out of prison that will come to work. And that's when we really got our shot. And to this day, now I'm almost 6 years sober. And there's still times that I just have that rebellious mind where I'm just like, what if I just screw it all off? Like, what if I just, sometimes it's a lot of pressure. And the responsibility can really get to me. And I have those fleeting thoughts of just twisting off. But I think back to that moment and how I know that it was because I was 1 year sober that happened for me. And I was in God's will and I was in alignment with what he was trying to do for us. And so that's what keeps me going today. And fast forward to today, we have hired about 3,000 people.
Wow. And hired out, are you talking about the prisoners you've hired out 3,000 people?
Yeah. So make placements through our staffing agency.
Got it. So you call them returning citizens, right? Isn't that the phrase that you use?
There's many phrases that many different people use. They say returning citizens, people who are justice impacted, people in recovery. I use all of those phrases interchangeably just to help people be educated, because if I continue to just say returning citizens or justice impacted people, and I'm trying to get HR professionals to hire for me, if I'm saying those terms and they don't know what that means, then I'm not going to get my result that I'm looking for, which is sustainable employment for the people I'm serving. So a lot of times, because human first language, I can use human first language and say people with criminal records or people with felonies or people in recovery. I try to use that more so a wider audience can understand what I'm talking about. But if I am in rooms of people who are in the reentry space, then I will use returning citizens or justice impacted people.
Got it. So didn't you create a system of metrics so that you could explain to like potential employers and give them ownership of the choices that they were making with regard to your folk?
Yes. So whenever we bring in a new client, we look over the job recs they're trying to fill and we talk about their fears, because we know that everyone's human and they have fears. So we allow them to openly speak about their fears without facing judgment. And so if they tell me I really just don't want somebody who has murdered someone and I don't want a sex offender, then I'll just say, tell me why. And we kind of work through some of those fears and I help them understand if that's a valid fear or not. Again, no judgment, and it's still their decision because they're our client. We're just helping them fill a role. If they tell me we don't want people with sex crimes and we don't want people with murder convictions, then I have to adhere to that. But I will oftentimes help them understand that if it's a job that is in a warehouse or it's a lot of manual labor, I will ask them what is their fear for this person who has a sex offense. Like, what's the real fear here? Is there a real threat as it relates to the job being done? Or if we have a metal recycling company, and we actually propose to them that we don't hire people with a pattern of theft because of all the copper that is there. And that's a big problem that they have, is people stealing copper. So we're trying to make sure that we're making life easier and better and more profitable for our clients. We know that this isn't a charity. Yes, we're trying to do good work, and we're trying to help the community by reducing recidivism, but we also know that a company can't do this for charity. So we really lay out all the concerns, and we map out what the criminal background policy will be. We adhere to that. And then every single person that we place, we track how long they stayed at that job. Did they quit? Did they get fired? What's their criminal background? What is their charge? How long did they stay in prison? And a lot of our clients are very shocked to hear me say this. This is where I usually get them to change their mind. Usually when I walk into a new client's office, they're going to say, well, we just don't want to hire anybody with any violent crimes. That's where it starts. Usually it doesn't end that way, because I show them all the data and I explain all the different ways you can look at a background check and really misinterpret what really happened. And so a lot of our employers are shocked to hear that our candidates with violent crimes are 5 times more likely to be successful.
Wow.
Yeah. And that usually starts the conversation to rethink their background policy.
Why do you think that's true?
Well, I believe, based on the last decade of doing this work, number one, it's really usually when we have people come through our doors looking for second chance employment, it's very rare that they just have a nonviolent crime. Usually when there was a crime that involved drugs or alcohol, there's some kind of violence, there may be theft. And I explained to the employer that a terroristic threat, while that may look really scary on a piece of paper, that just means they screamed at somebody.
Yeah.
And so how many times, I don't know about you, but the family I come from, there was a lot of terroristic threats, especially during the holidays.
Yeah.
And it was a result of alcohol or drugs typically. And so I would just say that, number one, it narrows the talent pool. So I'm like, look, I'll try to fill these roles for you, but it's going to be like a needle in a haystack to find somebody with this skill with only a DWI. And the person with the only DWI is more likely to find jobs, and they'll look over that. They'll be like, oh, it's just a DWI. But then you have the person that did 10 years in prison for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, which one of my recruiters has that charge. She has 2 counts of it because she hit somebody with her car. They were in their car. She backed up and rammed her car into their car. So it was assault with a deadly weapon, and it was 2 counts because there was 2 people in the car. Nobody would hire her because of all her theft charges from her meth addiction. She did have the pattern of theft, and she had assault with a deadly weapon, and she had organized crime. And so she is more likely to stay at a place and be loyal to an employer because she understands how hard it is to get a chance and how difficult it is to get her foot in the door than the person who just has the DWI. And a lot of employers are willing to look past that.
So you also talk about a lot about these individuals that you hire out, how often they become permanent staff or permanent employees. What's behind that, and what kind of a rate are we talking about?
I would say that the reason that happens so there's staffing agencies all over the world, and a lot of times staffing agencies are known for having poor results, kind of fill and bill and place people and then move them to another job and then another job. And that makes sense because a staffing agency makes money when somebody's going to work on their payroll. So we tell our clients, look, we're wanting this guy to stay with you. After the 3 months, we want him to convert with you. So we do charge a little more than other staffing agencies because we are telling the employer that is our goal for this person to convert. And I think that we do well for the same reason that I talked about earlier, for people knowing that it's hard to get another chance. They're loyal. The same reason why these individuals get into gangs at an early age is the same reason they can become a really loyal employee. And whether you come from a background of wealth or a background of poverty, if there's dysfunctional family dynamics, you grow up looking for acceptance and validation. And I'm even a person that looked for acceptance and validation. And I was always a very loyal employee because I just wanted a family to fit in with. That's why I think that they convert so often. And it really depends on the employer or the year because our numbers change all the time. But when we have a really great employer that has a positive environment, we can have 2 warehouses that are both of our clients and right next door to each other with the same work and the same pay. And both of them don't have AC. Like everything's the same. The only difference is the management. And we can have one of those be 100% success rate, nearly 100%. We almost never have 100% success rate, but we have somewhere 9 out of 10 people will stay and convert. And the place next door, 0 out of 10 will stick around and convert. We have to vet our clients just as much as we vet our candidates, because sometimes clients come in with the wrong idea, and it's a really bad way to look at this, but it is what it's just people, and it's just human nature. But we have to know if we're going to do business with someone or not. But there's times we can tell that a client is coming in and they want to hire from us because they think these people are desperate and they're willing to work for less and willing to accept a more toxic environment. So instead of investing in time and resources and doing empathy training and making those difficult and expensive changes to change the workforce, they think coming to a second chance staffing agency is going to be the solution. And it's not, because there's still people, and people coming from prison, one thing that's very important to them is respect. And if they feel disrespected, they're not going to stick around.
Right. Wow, that's so amazing. Let's back up a bit. Tell us about the world you grew up in and how this all became important to you. How old are you now? Can I ask?
Yeah, I'm 37.
Okay.
I grew up, I had a really great family, and we lived in a great neighborhood. I was on the cheerleading team. I was on the softball team. My dad always believed that to be idle is the devil's playground. So if I wasn't in sports, then I needed to have a hobby. My dad had me in Awana growing up, helping me remember Bible verses. My dad was my hero. I really loved him. I still do. But he fell victim to addiction when I was in high school. He tried meth at work one day, and I found out because I was talking to a neighbor, and that neighbor happened to be his drug dealer. And he revealed to me that your dad smokes meth. I didn't know what meth was, so I started asking him about it. What does it do? And it all sounded good to me. First of all, my dad, who's my hero, thought it was a good idea to use it. But second of all, when I heard that it makes you lose weight and have a lot of energy, that sounded...
You're in high school, right?
I'm in high school. I'm a cheerleader, so I wanted to lose weight and have energy. That sounded good to me. So I ended up trying the drug. I became addicted to it, and it wasn't long before my parents divorced and I went to go live with my dad, and I became one of his dealers. And so needless to say, I was kicked off the cheerleading team, kicked off the softball team, barely graduated high school, really went down a dark path, was in neighborhoods I shouldn't have been in at a very young age. I don't know how, I just don't know how I'm alive right now. Lots of arrests. I never got a felony. And that's the craziest thing to me, because there were times I was even pulled over and I had meth on me. But, I just believe that I do believe in profiling, racial profiling and discrimination. And I feel that I didn't look like a person that needed her car to be searched. So there was one time I was driving the wrong way on a divided highway, and I just told the police officer I was really tired and I had just finished a photography shoot. That was true, but the part that I left out was that I was on a 3-day meth binge and I had meth in the car. So I never got arrested for meth. I got arrested for warrants and petty theft and just stuff that as a result of my addiction. Because I got out of the meth, so I got sober from meth, I finally realized this is not for me. And I went straight towards, I wanted to work in the newsroom. I got a job in the newsroom. I invented a product. I was just very inventive and entrepreneurial. And that kind of was the mask that I wore to cover up all the shame and guilt and just everything that I was trying to hide from and run from. And I was very angry at my father and very disappointed in him and very hurt. But instead of being sad, I was just angry and prideful, and I was going to hustle till my haters asked if I was hiring. I was going to do anything I could to let the world know that I'm a badass, which, the fall came with the DWI and all that. But Cornbread Hustle was born because my dad he got a criminal record with his addiction, and I wanted more than anything to save my dad and to give my dad a job. And my dad died when I was about 2 years sober. I might have been almost 3 years sober. And I was his caregiver, helping him before he died and taking him back and forth to the hospital. And it just was always a dream for me that he got sober too and he could work for my company. And so when he died, it was very hard for me to keep going and to stay strong. But God did what God did and showed me all the ways that, like Romans 8:28, that's my favorite verse. And even when I was playing roller derby, I had the numbers 828 on the back of my jersey. I'd do anything in the world if I could have my dad back today, but I just see how everything worked out. And I don't know if I would have ever got a boyfriend or got into a hobby or started to learn who my identity in Christ was if my dad didn't pass away, because I was so codependent. Like going from daddy's little girl to daddy's drug dealer to daddy's caregiver was very hard on me. And so the Romans 8:28 of it all, again, like if God came and walked in my door right now and was like, you can have your dad back, I'd be like, okay. I mean, I'd actually probably have to think about it, because I know my dad's not in pain anymore, and my dad was living with a lot of guilt and shame, and my dad was struggling to stay sober. And so I do know he's in a better place.
But you're actually in a better place too.
I'm in a better place too. Yeah. It's, whenever I started writing my book, that was how I kind of came home to myself. I was able to process the feelings and acknowledge I was very disappointed in my dad, and I love my dad. My dad made me very sad, and he made me very happy. And that's when you get true healing, when you start processing those contradicting feelings and saying it can be both.
Yeah, I talk about having 2 photo albums in my inside world, right? The one photo album that I could always look to and say, see, you're still an SOB, right? And the other photo album I didn't want to look at were the things that he did well and the kindnesses, because it challenged the photo album that I like to use against him. And in fact, I was talking to some of the guys, my friends on death row, and they said, that's the American justice system, right? You take a picture of someone and they're only known for the worst day of their life after that.
Yeah.
So, that's Terry, one of the guys on death row, said that. He said, look, it's a horrible thing to be only known for the worst day of your life. And Emerson said, every human being should be judged by the best day of their life. So, yeah, so I get it. I get the struggle. What helped you stay clean and sober?
I'm definitely in a 12-step program.
Good for you. I love the 12-step program.
Yeah, I have a sponsor. Every Tuesday morning, I host a recovery meeting. I've been doing it every Tuesday for 4 years because I share so much of my story on LinkedIn, and so many people are like, I need help, and I can't type back to everyone. So I always just send a link, and I'm like, join me every Tuesday. If you're curious, just keep your camera off and you can listen.
Yeah.
And it's just a bunch of people coming together, sharing their own experiences. That helps. I did almost relapse after my dad died. And I thought I'd relapse over alcohol. I always told people I won't drink again, but if my dad dies, I probably will. And so then my dad died, and I actually didn't have any desire to drink at all, because I knew I was so depressed already, and I knew a hangover would probably cause me to be suicidal. Like I wasn't interested. I felt bad enough. I'm not one of those drunks that want to be sad and drink from a bottle. I'm more of the person who sabotages everything going well. I'm going to drink because I'm celebrating achieving something and then ruin it all. So it was an unexpected thing. I never thought I'd relapse on meth, because it's been, I don't know how long, since 2007, since a couple of years out of high school. So almost 20 years. And I was frustrated because my dad's addiction is kind of a secret that I kept. The family knew about it, obviously. Anybody that had dealings with him knew about it. But his family, his friends, they had his side of the story. I never felt that it was my story to tell, to say he's an addict and this is what he put me through. I didn't want to hurt him while I still had hope that he'd get sober. I didn't want his shame to drown him. So I never, every time, even when I went on the Steve Harvey show and I shared about my addictions, to this day, until I started writing this book, I really, and this is one of the first, I think I only admitted it on another podcast, but I really never shared anything about my dad because I didn't want him to face that shame. Well, I was so angry because his family that was in a different town was screaming at me, telling me he's no addict. Why would you say this about him? And his mom, who lived with him, was screaming at me, like, stop saying this. And I felt like gaslighted, like the biggest gaslight of my life. Like, am I going crazy? Like,
Yeah.
I literally sold him drugs. So when I was cleaning out some of his stuff in his kitchen, because their house was kind of a hoarder house. I live in it now. That's where I'm at right now, my dad's house. I found a piece of foil folded up, and I opened up the foil, and I know because I used to smoke meth off foil. I opened it up, and there was a meth shard right there. And I said, "See me, Ma? It's meth." And she said, "That's not meth. That's a piece of rice." And I was like, "I'll show you." And I don't know why. Like, I was prompted. I broke open a pen because that's how I used to do it, is break apart a pen. And I put the pen in my mouth to get ready to suck in the smoke. And I lit the bottom of the foil. And right when I saw the smoke starting to come up, I just threw it all down and like grabbed my heart. And I thought, what was I about to do? And I barely smelled the scent of it. That just reminded me of like, it was like I saw a flash of a demon in my face. Like, and so I went and I threw it in the trash and I just started crying. And I realized that, like, I know the truth. I can't, what was I was literally about to prove to somebody my dad was an addict by relapsing. Like, how stupid is that? Like, see?
Sabotage.
Yeah. And so I'll tell you though, when I went and put that little shard of meth in the trash can outside, I thought about it the whole week until the trash man came.
Wow.
Every day I thought I could go out there and I could smoke that meth. I can go out there, I can smoke that meth. So that was an unexpected thing. So anger, that's what can get me to relapse, like drinking at somebody. That's why I've always been afraid to get married. Like, if my husband makes me so mad, I drink at him and say, "Look what you made me do. Now I'm a good for nothing wife and mom. I can't do anything for anybody."
Right.
So,
yeah. I call that piece of shit theology.
Yeah, that's what I have to fight against, is making sure I don't get in those areas. So I just work really hard on the self-care stuff. And when I get really overwhelmed, I think it's when I get too much of a sense of responsibility and I feel like I can't carry it, is when I have to step back and give it to God and take a deep breath, because it can get really dangerous really quick. Most of the times when I've almost relapsed, it's been because I want to tell people, now I'm no good to nobody.
Yeah. I know that. I know that kind of an excuse, and it's all based on the messaging that we've been told our whole lives, that we're worthless, basically.